Electronics is so pervasive in our society, so pervasive. It's everywhere. It's in your car, it's in your home, it's in your phone, it's in your pocket. To have an understanding of electronics and therefore to encourage kids in that, I think it would be a really good thing.
I think very little is happening at the school level. I think we'd have some, I'm talking about the primary and secondary school.
There are no technical schools, which is where I came from. I came from a technical school, which gave me skills.
It's disappointing, the lack of general knowledge that a lot of younger people have, which is probably because they've got more distractions than they used to have.
Children of today need to learn how things work, how electronics and the media they use today, the evolution of it, so they can understand that it just didn't miraculously appear. There were people that worked tirelessly from hundreds of years ago to now to produce what they take for granted by a push of a button.
Kids are born with no knowledge. All knowledge is learnt. There are people who will learn knowledge on their own, the bright ones, but most people need to be shown how to do something.
There's a vast gulf of technical ignorance, if I can call it that, whereas there's a very small proportion of the population, perhaps less than 1%, who are aware of technology and how it works and how it functions.
There's this cliche that people say that kids of today grow up with technology, they understand it intimately. I don't think that's actually true. I think they know how to drive it, they know how to pick up a device, they know what buttons to press. As far as the majority of them are concerned, the actual box itself is magic. They wouldn't have a clue what it does internally.
Most people don't understand how a car works. Most people don't understand how a TV set works.
If something seems hard, people won't try necessarily, and so the vast majority of people see electronics as being mysterious, and it really is this magic black box, something that they could never understand. And if something seems like you can never understand it, it's beyond you, then you're not even going to try.
You take the average person, what do they know about their motor car? What did they ever know about their motor car? They know very little. Unless they are working on them, doing their own repairs, the average person has no knowledge. They have no knowledge of electricity. They don't even know how a light bulb works.
In Australia, it's important for us to have an ecosystem of electronics hobbyists through to retail and educational institutions to allow people to progress their interest in electronics from a hobby right through to employment.
I think it's a sad indictment that everything's been reduced in learning to an equation or just a mention.
If you're young and you want to learn electronics, how do you start? And I don't know.
It needs to reintroduce electronics to schools.
If any of those systems become weaker or disappear from the ecosystem, it stops anyone new from entering or become a hobbyist and realising their dream of taking that into a lifelong hobby or form of employment.
People take things too easy now. If you want to know anything, you just look up the internet. You don't have to remember it, you don't have to learn it, you don't have to study, you just look it up.
In the golden age, we got a piece of technology and we were able to pull it apart and understand it.
I wonder sometimes whether this is a social thing, that people are turned away from the technology because of I see it in a situation, I suppose it's familiarity breeding contempt. We have so much of the technology that people just see it as just something that's there and don't value it as we should.
But the fact is that there are some people who just love to know how things work.
And there's all the other people who happily use it and enjoy the convenience that it offers, all the wonderful features, but they don't know. Is that a bad thing? Possibly. I don't know.
And there are some people who don't care, but are very clever knowing how to operate a computer.
The problem with the technology is people are good at using it, but they don't really understand what that's about, and they don't understand or appreciate the value of that technology.
And so what we've ended up with is a society that is very well educated in terms of consuming technology, but not in terms of creating it.
People today accept technology in their hand. They don't question it. They don't need to understand what it's doing.
We're becoming technological consumers in Australia, not technological innovators.
Australia, consumer-wise, I mean, the LCD TVs we buy are just incredibly high per capita in the world. Our electronics retailers are booming with their consumer goods.
I've got the impression that the lack of interest these days in how things work isn't a particularly Australian phenomenon.
A lot of the children that are coming through today are not interested. at getting any further?
I think it's not the go for today. It's not the trend for today. They're just not interested. Maybe because of the fact that they don't know enough about it. They don't know what potential it has. They don't know that it's only limited to their imagination as to what they can do with it.
Is it because there's nothing left to invent? Or is it because the ideas that are out there are not getting seen or used or utilised in any way? Sort of not training the youth of today to survive.
I think there's very little training or classes or things like that.
Through the late 80s and early 90s, there was a slump in teaching electronics in many schools due to the fact that the amount of resources they had available had to be shifted towards the teaching of information technology topics as computing became more popular and prevalent, and people found that there was more of a drive to become computer literate. So the budgets for some schools would be diverted to computing and so forth instead of electronics teaching.
I think it's very important to teach the technology and sciences, not necessarily electronics to everybody, but certainly the technology and sciences, because if we lose that ability to do these things, we lose our ability for some of the development.
For one thing, funding, there's less, as you know, public funding for every level of education in Australia, so the more expensive courses to run will be chopped. And unfortunately, it isn't cheap to teach someone electronics. It requires hardware much more than a classroom and a whiteboard.
Now, all of the money in electrical engineering goes to one university, and that makes it very difficult. The result of that is, since the 1990s, all of the electrical engineering schools have been disappearing from the country.
Well, education's become big business.
I really deeply fear what's happening in our society now that universities and TAFE colleges have been turned into profit-making centres. I think what amazes me is the finance community try to almost force their profit-making rhetoric on everybody, and some things have to be provided in society. How can you have an intelligent society that, with a rich, educated, first world country, if you don't make sure you educate your children? And one of the things that really I freak out about is the cost of some of these university courses. And my TAFE course was like $78, that I started, and I did it for a full year of electronics.
It is true that the teaching of electronics has shifted towards systems integration and more software and IT-based courses in Australia. For example, a lot of people now consider learning about hardware, working with computer components like replacing hard drives and motherboards and how these can work together and how you can write software to run with computers. However, the level of education that details the basic theory, or how do you design your own computer and how do you make those motherboards, that level of education is decreasing rapidly.
I believe when I first started, we had we're running 2 people running an electronics course 4 nights. We had a number of students full time, and my understanding is at the moment that they are contemplating closing the electronics for lack of students at this stage. And if there is an electronics course running at the School of Mines this year.
Why would you run electronics courses at universities, for example? Where would they get jobs? Where would the companies like the Cochlears and the ResMeds like Silanna, where do they come from?
The amount of research which goes on in our universities and technical colleges is relatively small to what it could or should be. And it's not expensive. That's possibly the most frustrating part for all concerned.
But as far as certificate of technology, radio, TV type, tradesman type courses, I don't think there is.
I believe at the electronic level, at the TAFE level, Box Hill TAFE would probably be, in fact I understand that Box Hill TAFE probably has more students than the rest of Victoria and New South Wales put together.
I mean, I could fail if I went to TAFE. At $78, if I didn't pass it, it's not a life-destroying thing. So you have more ability to fail, and that's half the way you learn is to have the ability to fail without massive consequences. Now if you fail, and you don't like the course or you want to change or something, you're up for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And hey, what's the only way you don't have to pay back the HECS debt? You go overseas. So if you don't want to pay back a HECS debt, you just go overseas and you never come back. And so that's also happening. We're educating people now, they're running up giant debts and they just disappear overseas and they never have to pay it back. And so we're actually educating a generation that either pay it back and have a huge penalty and burden on their life, or they just disappear. And we're desperately trying to hire engineers and we can't find enough. So I think it's much, much harder, and I think that the younger generation are under enormous pressure to try and educate themselves, and I think that's a real tragedy that we're basically treating universities and TAFE courses as profit-making businesses and educating reams of overseas students instead of educating our own population.
I'm sad to see the way we are going It's not just in the electronics. In this country, we're doing this in our technical. We're getting this brain drain, and I think we need to do more.
And so for me, I never would have taken a TOEFL course if it had been thousands of dollars. I just would never have had the confidence to bet on my own abilities to do that. So I think that the biggest fear I really have is that these days it's very, very difficult to get an education if you've got no money.
But only a certain number of people have got the aptitude to solder components together and get it going and troubleshoot it.
And it's no surprise to me at all that some of the best guys in the industries either do not have qualifications or came from that hobbyist background. That's just a very common way it is in the electronics industry.
But there's no doubt that the hobbyist side has gone down.
As they're going through school, for example, they'll not necessarily think that being able to design new electronic devices is something that they can aspire to. It'll seem like it's all too hard. It's something that's done far away in a foreign country by big companies, and there's really no opportunity for it locally. So they'll go for other avenues of work or other possibilities.
That is so logical that in a decline period you lose all the technologies, you lose all the interest, it's not taught, and then in the up period you don't have the people with the skills that you need to carry on the profession. That's why you end up dragging in the retirees. China was setting up their valve factory again, dragged in anybody that was still alive that worked in the factory, and you had these 90-year-old women showing the young 18-year-olds how to wind the heaters by hand.
But I think the real reason why electronics for the hobbyists has died because they can't see that there's a need for it. They can't see that if they learn about how to build a radio, they'll go and either design radios or fix them. They can't see the absolute need.
So the things that people are making are either inventions or part of their learning process. They're just building things for fun. But overall, I would say that we're not building as many things that we would use in our day-to-day life.
That's the reason why people nowadays can't see the need to learn electronics, because before they could go into a radio or build televisions or build some consumer product, they can't see that there's no market there.
That's what happens. You're relying on it. It's a pity it couldn't be sustained, so you didn't have to then panic and try and source somebody with knowledge that might still be around and willing to help.
Yeah, the decline in electronics is industry-wide. Because there's no manufacturing, the kids today don't see a job in electronics. You know, you don't get a job as a TV repairman anymore.
I think it was easier to get a job in computer science or electronics. Now it's a lot harder.
Understanding the technology is vital to our future, because if we lose that ability, we won't get it back.
If we lose the ability to innovate in technology, then we just become consumers, and that's really what we need to overcome. We need to make sure that as a nation we are creators and innovators, not just consumers of technology.
If we didn't have a technological capability and maintain that technological capability, how would we maintain our medical equipment, our traffic signals, our airport landing systems? We just need that capability. And you may be able to import some of the products, but you still have to maintain interface and development.
And the demise of the technical schools was just dreadful. I could see that happening. There wouldn't be people with the skills. And in fact, the retirees that used to help me out actually did say they'll have to reopen the technical schools again so that they can teach these people, because when it's gone, and I've experienced that.
But we don't have the electrical engineering course anymore, so I presume there is no need to employ another electrical engineer.
And the thing is, if this doesn't happen now, you're going to wind up with a real technological black hole in Australia shortly.
Australia's heading towards a technological black hole in terms of its youth, because we're not inventing things anymore.
There is a chance of a black hole, as I see it at the moment, with less and less involvement unless you have a ticket and go somewhere else.
But I'm a founder of a local hackerspace in Melbourne, and hackerspaces are groups of enthusiasts, hobbyists who come together to build electronics, and you're surrounded by people who've got experience, who've got parts, who can share and collaborate with you, and so I think that's an excellent way of learning.
Hackerspaces are really quite a remarkable innovation in terms of a community support group.
This is a pretty recent phenomenon, and I think it may be a direct reaction to the decline in some of these local sources of information.
Hackerspaces are just these open community places, a building or somebody's garage, where you can go into and you can be with like-minded hackers. You can share the gear, share community gear, and just build robots and hack stuff.
It's like a gym, right? You got your gym membership and you can go there, and they've got, fabricators and CNC machines and rapid prototypers and all that kind of stuff. And just that idea of pooling resources together, both to share knowledge, but also to afford stuff that you couldn't otherwise afford, or for a company, maybe like us, where we end up with a bunch of stuff that we're only using 10% of the time. And if you can come to a good arrangement with the community where you can get a bunch of enthusiastic people in there making good use of the equipment, why not?
If that involves a degree of bypassing of the existing educational establishments, that's okay. It becomes incredibly targeted learning experience for them.
So hackerspaces are a great entry point, because whilst a lot of the electronics and software is quite easy to use these days, it's you can acquire software very easily. You just use Google, you go to a website, download it, it comes with all the source code. You can go to a website like SparkFun or Freetronics and pick up an Arduino, and off you go. But people don't necessarily know how easy this is. They don't necessarily know all the things that they need to know to put together a working system. And so if they come along to Hackerspace, we've got a bunch of friendly people who are knowledgeable and very willing to share. That just makes the process of getting going so much easier.
You're going to find, even within Hackerspace, a huge diverse range of interests, and you're going to find a subset that appeals to you interest-wise.
I do believe it is more important to teach people to learn so that they become resourceful in their own right. Then the rest will happen.
Anything you can do to improve the level and the amount of technology presented in high school science classes, anything you can do to improve the quality and the level of access to tertiary education.
But if we don't keep up our technical education, we don't get people and encourage people to do that, we're going to lose that. And at some stage we will go back to being either farmers, supplying or minerals, and we'll take whatever the world has to offer us. At the moment, we really are doing very well. We've had many innovations, and because we're free thinking, we know that this is a beautiful country and we've got everything going for us. I'd hate to think we'd lose that.
It's very important that education keeps up with the teaching of electronics. It's important that we still have research and design in Australia to give enthusiasts something to aim for with a goal in their career.
Australia likes to see itself as a clever country, and if you lose a high-tech industry like the electronics industry, you've got to say, well, that's a big chunk of that clever country gone.
Getting students interested in science is not too difficult. I mean, most people either have a yearning to understand why. Science and chemistry is a nice way of starting to answer that in simple ways, but getting people to understand that there's a career that you can make out of that, especially within Australia where there isn't high visibility career paths to do that. One of the nice things that we try and advertise here at Silanna is that we are doing some really quite innovative technologies which aren't being done anywhere else in the world. I mean, our laboratories here that you've seen are really on par with labs in Intel, IBM, all of those. And once you really appreciate that this is what we're doing here in Australia, there's a potential career path. So it's no longer this esoteric thing you see in a science program that's really cutting edge research. We're doing it right here at Silanna, which is quite fun.